Well, hello and welcome to Polity Matters. My name is Ben Ratliff, and I'm joined by Scott Edberg and Jared Nelson. Hey guys, how are y'all doing today?
Great.
Doing well. There might be some construction sounds in the background, but we're finishing up our renovation on our new building, and so it's been exciting.
Is your pulpit going to be like clear plastic, like all the popular ones are these days? Is that one of your projects?
That's a joke. That's a joke that's often made, that how much input does the pastor get, and do we force him to have a plexiglass pulpit? And so I'll tell you, the church will love me or not love me based on the pulpit they construct for me, because they know that I would die to have such a pulpit. But no, it's going to be made of wood. We have a carpenter in the church that is constructing it, I think, as we speak.
I had to lead our devotional time at prayer meeting last night, and I don't normally do that. My senior minister does that, but there's this teeny tiny little skinny like wooden music stand that I had to use. And I mean, you just feel exposed and almost naked when you're behind something that's that small. Like when you're bigger than the piece of furniture you're using, it's not okay. You know. Yeah. Well, that was good. I had a note in my personal notes here that just said banter with a question mark, and I think we've accomplished that. Good.
Everything is robotic. It's just a checklist on this podcast.
I like pulpits too.
Well, before we get into the content today of our chapter, I did want to remind listeners you can support our work financially, and you can find a link in the show notes to do that. Supporting us helps keep the show on from week to week. We do have expenses when it comes to producing this content and even just keeping it on the internet. So one day, someday, when the show fails to produce regularly, we will still have to have expenses to keep it available into the future. But beyond that, supporting also gets you access to a group chat that we've created where we discuss various polity-related things from time to time. I mean, we're not always the ones starting the conversation. It's been especially lively lately, as it turns out. It's been very interesting. So if you're into that kind of thing, you can support. Support also gets you swag. When GA season rolls around and we get our branded items made, we do give priority to supporters. We'll even mail you stuff if that's what we need to do if you're not going to be at General Assembly. So use the link to find a way, use a link to go support us. And you can reach out to us if you have questions about that. We'd be happy to talk to you. And for all of you who do support, you have our gratitude and thanks. It is a huge help to us and helps us keep doing what we're doing, which is a lot of fun for us and we hope valuable for everybody else. Okay, today we are discussing PCA Book of Church Order, Chapter 48, the Sanctification of the Lord's Day. And I know we mentioned it last week, but we have definitely entered into the devotional portions of the BCO. So when we write our devotional on the BCO, nobody will be surprised when most of our content comes from this portion in the directory. I appreciate this chapter so much because it doesn't read as so restrictive as it does as, I think, warm and inviting. Now, that's coming from somebody who tends to agree with pretty much everything that's written in these sections. It's Morton Smith that explicitly frames Sabbath keeping as a blessing and a positive command, and encourages us to remember that we're keeping it holy and sanctifying it, not just keeping up a list of don'ts for the Lord's Day. Guys, we didn't talk about it beforehand, but I'm just going to say it and let you guys chime in. I'll speak for myself and let y'all contribute if you want to. We know we've got a lot of different kind of perspectives listening to the show. I know we've got guys out there that certainly probably state differences with Lord's Day statements in Westminster and the standards. I'm coming at this chapter with somebody who doesn't state any differences. I don't have any recorded differences with the standards at all. And so I'm pretty much in agreement with everything here. And we're going to teach it from that angle. Like as we talk about it today, we'll talk about it the way it's written. But I'm not trying to be heavy handed, from a personal standpoint. I'm not trying to, use this to bash anybody over the head. And if we disagree, that's perfectly fine with me, but we're just going to try to present what's written here.
I think it's helpful to go through the actual wording here because a lot of it comes down to things on recreation. And I will talk to guys who I basically agree with on recreation, and I didn't take an exception and they did. And it's just because sometimes we don't know what we're talking about, so or have shared definitions, you know. So that's why it's helpful to actually go through a text and say, what does this say, and what does it not say?
Yeah.
No comment on my views on the Sabbath.
No comment?
No comment. You get to just find out as you go.
Oh boy. There's a lot of good titles already. We've said some good things. Okay. Well, let's get into it. So 48.1 sort of just lays the biblical foundation, and it's just a quotation of a shorter catechism. So BCO 48.1, the fourth commandment requireth the keeping holy to God such times as he hath appointed in his word, expressly one whole day in 7 to be a holy Sabbath to himself. And a reference there to Shorter Catechism 58. So it's just a quote of a part of our doctrinal standards. I think the first thing to note here is just that in the same way 47 quadruples down on the regulative principle by having it in every portion of our Constitution, same thing here. The PCA Constitution quadruples down on the Lord's Day by repeating this teaching on the Lord's Day in every part of our constitutional documents. I'm going to let you guys jump in here. This is pretty standard. It's just a definition of what the Fourth Commandment's requiring. I mean, what's significant to point out before we get into the rest of the sections?
I think a big one is what you pointed out. This is in 4 places in our standards. It talks about the Lord's Day. I mean, we don't talk about the 10 Commandments everywhere in the standards, but we do this particular commandment. And it tells us the significance that it has. I mean, this is the first content chapter of the directory, which means that it's foundational. I think of in the 10 Commandments, you can think of the first 4 as particularly dealing with worship, in terms of giving our object of worship, no other gods, but the one true God, our means of it in the second commandment, the manner of it in the third, and then the fourth is the day and setting aside the time for it. And if we don't have a view of the Lord's Day as binding in some sense, that we're to worship one day in 7, the rest of the chapter is meaningless because nobody's going to gather. Nobody's going to set the time for it. So it's important. I thought Morton Smith has an interesting line on it. He says, it's difficult to understand why there's such opposition to the view of the Sabbath held by these standards, you know, in light of the fact that it's in 4 different places. It's not a throwaway line here or there. The doctrine of the Lord's Day, Christian Sabbath, is pretty integral to Reformed ideas of theology and worship.
Yeah, it's not just a hobby horse. I can't remember if Smith said that or not. It was something to that degree. This isn't just something that we, some of us like to tout over and over again. It's very significant to our system.
Yeah, and thinking of, we're not 9 commandment denomination. The Lord has given his church 10 commandments, and that is morally binding to all people at all times, and it is good for people to rest, and the Lord has ordained when that would be, both physically and spiritually. And so as we, as Presbyterians, approach this topic, we are approaching it as a divine command given by God to his people. And it's a blessing. It's a command that gives great blessing.
From a pastoral standpoint, and I think that's the angle we're going to take on so many of these upcoming chapters is, how do we teach our people? Jared, before we started, you and I were talking about how these chapters are meant for teaching, right? These are meant to help us educate the church on what God wants from us. When we read this expressly one whole day in 7, what's y'all's experience in the PCA with what people assume that means? You can make the joke that, one whole day doesn't mean 1 hour of one day. But, whole day orientation, I know people that at different seasons in their life, and this wasn't necessarily with or without my advice, but they would do like a sundown Saturday to a sundown Sunday because they were trying to be Jewish or something. I don't know. All that is to say, I've heard of tons of different perspectives on this whole day in 7, one whole day language. What do y'all think? What have you heard?
That's how you get around. That's how you have Super Bowl parties at your church. You just you become that kind of Sabbatarian where
4 p.m. Saturday through
4 p.m. Saturday to 4 p.m. Sunday, and now you're free. You don't have to go to evening worship. No, I think that in my context, I'm one of a few in this area. Sabbatarianism is not popular in Illinois, and so I don't. In Tuscumbia, I heard about the sundown, sunset kind of thing, but here I'm just trying to work at getting people to orient their minds on Sunday being something more than just a day that I get to do whatever I want. So in my context, trying to reclaim Sunday as important is part of my work.
Yeah, it gets into that a little bit more in the final section there. Gives you some activities that you might be doing during that. I think it is difficult for churches that only have a morning service to do this, to help their people keep the Lord's Day. And so that comes into play there, because then it just puts the rest of the day on the shoulders of the parents, the heads of households, to figure out what that is. And then it becomes much more about what don't you do. One book that I've loved is William Chauntry's Make the Sabbath a Delight, or Call the Sabbath a Delight. And he gets into that a little bit of, if all of your questions about the Sabbath is, can I take a bike ride? Can I take a walk? Can I throw a ball around? You're asking the wrong questions. It's much more the idea of, what do you say during the week? Like, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to read a Christian book. I don't have time to do catechism. I don't have time for prayer. Well, now you have a whole day. Like, if you set aside a day, you're going to have time for those things that you say that you don't have time for in every other day.
I do think, just to kind of bounce off what Scott said, like, what you're dealing with in your local congregation is different than what I'm dealing with in my local congregation related to this issue, right? Like, you're aiming in a direction. My congregation's already kind of set up, and I would say that we're a different place from where you are. I'm not saying anything. What am I trying to say? I think as we work our way through this chapter, it's important to remember that application of these things will vary from family to family and individual to individual and church to church, presbytery to presbytery. That's not to say that you can do whatever you want with it. I think there's clear statements in Scripture and what are reflected here, but there is going to be a variety in terms of application and what it looks like in particular. So just as an encouragement, if you're not doing what one of the three of us is doing, it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing anything wrong. You guys must both be muted, because it is eerily quiet right now in my headphones. I don't even know what to do.
I don't think you want to hear the construction, so...
Well, maybe the listeners do. I don't know. Write in. If you guys want to hear the construction, tell Scott on Twitter. BCO 48:2, we see the shift, the Sabbath moves, and it says, God commanded his Old Testament people to keep holy the last day of the week, but he sanctified the first day as the Sabbath by the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ from the dead. For this reason, the church of the new dispensation has from the time of the apostles kept holy the first day of the week as the Lord's day. So, nothing we don't know here, right? God commanded Old Testament Israel to keep the last day of the week holy, but he sanctified the first day as the Christian Sabbath at the Lord's resurrection, and so we keep the first day as the Lord's day. And obviously in here, you can see that we are dispensationalists, right? There's a new dispensation that has occurred. Okay, sorry, bad joke. See, this is why I don't like y'all being muted, is because I can't hear you laughing hysterically at all of my wonderful solo banter here. Come on.
Section 2 here is about the fact that this is to be kept on Sunday, and at least within Reformed theology, we haven't said just choose a day. There's some people that will take the Sabbath and maybe for pastors say just choose a different day to have a Sabbath. And you might need to rest on another day because you're so busy on Sunday. But Sunday is the Christian Sabbath for the pastor as well. And this is a good and necessary consequence. There's not a verse that you can point to that says Sunday is now the Christian Sabbath and that sort of a change. What you see is good necessary consequence of they got together on the first day of the week and they worshiped and they did these things in regards to worship, and calling it the Lord's Day, which was another way to think about it. The day of the Lord in the Old Testament was, of course, Sabbath as well. It may be referring to. So this is our conclusion, our good and necessary consequence, that the day that we're talking about is Sunday and not Saturday. And that hasn't always been a universal conclusion. There actually were Seventh-day Baptists in the past, and some people who will call Saturday Sabbath and Sunday the Lord's Day. The Reformed traditional understanding, though, is Sunday is both the Sabbath and the Lord's Day, and by good and necessary consequence, that change has occurred in the New Covenant.
But the New Testament does talk about the people of God gathering on the first day of the week. And so whether that's prescriptive or descriptive in the context is perhaps debatable. But there is some evidence even in the New Testament that people gathered on this first day.
Yeah. The fourth commandment identifies a day. We have the first day of the week as the Christian Sabbath. I think it's worth saying again, and I just sort of wonder at this as we work our way through these chapters, because I mean, to be fair, and I can, in terms of confession of my own sin, I have not spent as much time in the directory for worship as I should have over my years in ministry. We were talking the other day privately, guys, right? Like how, even studying for ordination exams, it wasn't a priority on our exams because it wasn't quote unquote constitutional. And so this is significant. And I feel like I'm coming at it sort of freshly because I haven't spent as much time in the directory over the years. But I am amazed at how we are more tent pegs are put down, not just in establishing the principle of Shorter Catechism 58 in the first paragraph, but even here of establishing that Sunday is the Lord's Day. This is not something that the PCA, that men can kind of decide as they want to. We've got several places where we're cementing this. This should be one of the places that we disagree on the least, because it's clear that our constitutional documents are putting it down pretty hard.
You must remember, this is just pious advice, my friend.
Yeah, well, it's much more pious than me and most men I know, so we should take it seriously. 48:3. What's the moral obligation? What are we doing here in this day? 48:3 says, "It is the duty of every person to remember the Lord's Day and to prepare for it before its approach. All worldly business should be so ordered and seasonably laid aside as that they may not be hindered thereby from sanctifying the Sabbath, as the Holy Scriptures require." I don't know. It strikes me first, and I don't know how much we want to get into this or not, but every person is to remember the Lord's Day. So just this statement that God's law is not just for Christians; it's for everybody, and that means that we're Christian nationalists, right, guys? That's not what this means? Okay. There's obviously a lag because. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I think what this is telling us, though, is that there's an importance to the Lord's Day before you get there. Saturday night, there's certain things you should be prepared for, making food and having things a little bit more taken care of on Sunday. A lot of times my wife will do a crock pot meal, so she's kind of getting the things together so she can just throw it together easy. It could be, on our way home from somewhere, we're stopping and getting gas, so we don't have to worry about that in the morning. It also is the case that we often are leaving places, like if we're invited someplace, we're leaving at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, because we're like, we got church tomorrow, we need prep, we need the rest. So if sometimes you're having a bad Lord's Day because you didn't prepare, you're tired, and so you don't get anything out of the worship. You didn't prepare for food, so you're trying to make excuses for picking up a pizza rather than, having prepared the night before. And 48:3 is telling us that preparation. This was in the original. They were to take the manna, they were to gather things, and they were supposed to do that on the day before. There's a day before prep, and that is the same for us today on Sunday worship. We should be prepping for the Lord's Day in certain ways on Saturday to not interfere with our Sunday worship.
I think that I would go even further and say that how we use our time throughout the week informs our Lord's Day. And so you don't need to cram everything on Saturday in order to have an effective Sunday, but how you use your time throughout the week. In other words, one of the positive encouragements in the Sabbath principle is that you're using all of your time well, and using your time well throughout the whole week will prepare you and allow you to rest on Sunday from worldly work. you're not expected necessarily to do your laundry and make all your meals on Saturday in order to prepare for Sunday, but you have the whole week in order to prepare for Sunday, making sure all your work is done so you don't have to do certain things on Sunday. I think that the Sabbath and the Sabbath principle is applicable to every day, and how we use every day informs how we use the Lord's Day.
Even as students, my clerk, Dr. Nykirk, will tell his students that he doesn't want them doing homework on Sundays. He wants them to prepare and have that day free. And so I also try to tell my kids that. They know a way to get dad upset is to, on Sunday evening, being like, oh yeah, I've got homework. I'm like, oh man, you had the whole week.
Let me ask y'all a question, sort of practically speaking. We all have people in our churches who struggle with Lord's Day observance from one degree to another. You've got the folks, on the one end, you're always going to have people that don't care. And on the other end, you're going to have people that, over police it and become very legalistic about it. And then you're going to have everybody in between. What do you tell an elder or, a ruling elder or a teaching elder who's struggling how to shepherd his flock, how to encourage them to keep the Lord's Day? But we also would tell them, but you're not meant to police every little tiny detail of their lives. How does somebody balance the tension that exists in that we want to shepherd our people to follow these instructions, but we also are not going to be micromanaging them, and they may do things that go against us that we're not fans of, but they're still our people. We still have to love them. Any thoughts there? How to balance those things?
I do two things in my context. I kind of treat it like being a Reformed Baptist, and so what I mean by that is, like, we have Reformed Baptists in our church, and they disagree with baptism and don't baptize their children, and I take opportunities as I see fit to catechize them according to a more biblical position as opportunity arises. And so that's one thing I do, is I try to teach. It's a positive teaching. I'm trying to teach the positive nature of the aspect of the Sabbath. And then, I don't know if this is kind of me or not, but whenever they struggle on the Sabbath, or like Baptists struggle with being Baptists, I remind them that it is so much better if you have the biblical position. When they say, oh, my kid doesn't have his homework done and he can't come to youth tonight because he didn't task himself and all of that, I'm like, well, you're living out your theology, and your children shouldn't have to do schoolwork on Sunday. But, you haven't cared well for them and preparing them for Sunday. And so they might not be Sabbatarians, but I try to remind them, or they complain about their Sundays being too busy. We have travel sports, this and that. And I'm like, you've chosen this life for yourself. It's so much better to not have these things in my life. Often people say, well, I want to go out to eat on Sunday. And I say, that just sounds terrible for a family of 5 with a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 4-year-old or whatever. That is not a restful time. Taking my kids to Walmart is not a restful time. I hate every second of it. I don't want to go out with my kids like that, especially on Sunday.
Especially Walmart.
Especially Walmart. I'm just a Walmart person. I go to Walmart in my full suit, which is like peak Walmart person. But nevertheless, reminding people of, like, well, this is your doctrine that you've lived out, and there could be better ways if you change some of those principles.
Yeah, I think my approach is there's not a lot of Sabbatarianism in Western PA, partly from the steel mills that had to run 7 days a week. And so there's not a rich heritage of it in this area. And what I find myself doing is I just have to say what I do, what my example is. So if somebody asks me a question, I just say, this is what we do. And then if people are asking, well, can I do this or can I not do that? I say, here's the benefits, I think, of doing this. And here's the principles. And there's just a few principles, I think, for you to lay out in terms of, I say I try not to do any commerce, not to try to do anything that would prohibit somebody else from keeping the Lord's Day, and say what I do rather than, how long can you take a walk before it's, prohibited? It's like, that's a wrong sort of question. I'll give you my example, what I do. I'll give you the benefits of keeping it and the principles. And I try not to say, rule into, let me be the one that polices, you do this, you don't do that.
Yeah. I've always been encouraged by something somebody told me early on in my ministry, which is that we're not here to force our people. We're here to shepherd our people, right? We're not behind them, beating them, for them to go forward. We're in front of them, leading them to draw them forward. It can be easy to get upset and bothered, especially with very practical things that are often not observed. But we must exhibit much patience with our people. Perhaps especially in these areas, since they're overlooked so much. But we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves. That was my fault. I jumped in. 48:4 keeps going, right? So 48:3 is about approaching it. 48:4, the whole day is to be kept holy to the Lord, and to be employed in the public and private exercises of religion. Therefore, it is requisite that there be a holy resting all the day from unnecessary labors, and an abstaining from those recreations which may be lawful on other days, and also, as much as possible, from worldly thoughts and conversation. If this were constitutional, it would clarify so much that people have trouble with in the standards. Because in the standards, the argument is always, well, is worldly attributed to employments and recreations, or this is actually very clear. But let me not get ahead of ourselves. So, public and private exercises of religion, resting from unnecessary labors, abstaining from recreations which may be lawful on other days, and refraining from worldly thoughts and conversation. So, there's your list. Are y'all laughing at me reading it over again, or are you laughing at the noise at Scott's?
Just my construction.
Everything.
They're building a doorway right outside my door.
I thought that was your stomach growling.
No, I want to talk, so I'll just have to talk over it.
Well, come on and talk then.
I think the first thing you have to see is the whole day. It's just not part of the day. That's the Lord's day. It's the whole day. But there is sometimes some misconception about the whole day. Some people get too granular with what this is meaning to say, that every little moment of the entire day must be devoted to worship, every second of the day. I don't think that's the intention here. I like to understand this better as the flavor of the day. I think of like a wedding ceremony, like if you have a wedding that you have to go to next week, that shapes the whole day. The whole day isn't the wedding ceremony, but if you're a bride or groom, every moment of that day, that whole day is kept aside for the wedding. And that's how I kind of understand the Sabbath, that the whole day is flavored, influenced by this setting apart of rest and worship to the glory of God. Not that every little second is done in acts of worship, but that the influence of the entire day is subject to it.
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, it's not the Lord's hour, but the whole day is in view here, but it's not the exact same thing that you're doing all day. And I think the unnecessary laborers and those recreations that may be lawful on other days, I have been to a Steelers game. It was not on a Sunday. It was very lawful for me to do so. It was a Monday night game. It was great. But it was not interfering with my Lord's Day. So, I mean, there's things that are recreations that you can do and, team sports that your kids are doing. But if you're hiring a referee to coach a game and it's at noon and you're like, there's just all sorts of things that are wrong with that. It's not that playing a sport is bad, but it's not helping you keep the whole day at this point. So, yeah, there's some things that you do that are morally neutral or good on other days that are not on that day. And it's not just during the hour of the Lord's Day worship.
Seriously, the silence from you guys is it's deafening. It is so frustrating to me. Keep doing what you need to do, but it is cracking me up because I'm like, wait, did I disconnect? Yeah, I need paper rustling in the background so I know that if I'm still connected or not. I keep thinking I've jumped off.
These are some good chips I'm eating.
How do you help people think through? Jared, earlier you said people ask and you say, well, this is what we do. What kind of principles can we establish for people? Or maybe these just are the principles we give them but people always want more help than just these sentences, right? Like, can I go hunting on the Lord's Day? Can I watch a football game on the Lord's Day? Can I, can I throw a ball in the backyard with my kid on the Lord's Day? We hear that at Presbytery a lot, right? Like,
yeah, I think the better approach is to set principles that are applicable. My goal, at least in Illinois, is to move the Overton window. Not like if I start with a strict Sabbatarian, do's and don'ts or whatever, that I've already lost the people. And so first is how do we think differently about that day? I think some of the main principles I try to encourage are that are easy to apply is don't engage in commerce or organized sports, and be somewhat laissez-faire in the home. Don't micromanage your kids saying, oh, you can't play with that today, or you can't do that. If they want to go outside and run and play, then let them do it. Try to encourage them to be quieter than louder, I think. Sometimes my house can be loud, but if the kids are able to play freely as they keep to themselves and are quieter about it. And so I think having big principles that are easy to apply, I think it helps rather than going down the billion different option case study. Well, how about this? How about that? Where's this line or that line? I think there's a lot of wisdom in applying the principle, but if you can get the principles dialed in right, then there are less questions on, well, can I do this or that?
Yeah, I think you schedule the big things, and other things give way to it. So if you have a time scheduled for morning worship, if your church has evening worship, those are scheduled, right? You don't say, well, we're going to do this other thing instead. If you have a time of family worship that you always have, that you talk about the sermon afterwards or something like that, you schedule around that. So it's not that like, hey, the neighbor came over and they want to jump on the trampoline in the background. Okay, is it in place of evening worship? Well, then there's probably a problem there. But is it, in between some of the major things that we've scheduled, and you have kids that have lots of energy and they're going to go crazy unless you let them get some of it out? I think it's about priorities. It's about principles. And once you do that, once you have those things in your day that you're doing, some of those questions take care of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and we get into, in the last section, we get into some things that are prescribed or at least encouraged for the day. But, we focus in our house. We've got young kids. I mean, my oldest is 7, and then we've got 3 more underneath her. We have special things we do on Sundays that we don't do on other days, right? Like chocolate milk is a Sunday thing. We have a mutual friend between the 3 of us. They have after church, people are invited to their house and they have ice cream Sundays. Like that's their basic, like their big meal on Sunday nights is ice cream, which is horrible, right? That's so unhealthy. I cannot believe you'd ever do something like that. But it makes the day special, right? And so there's it helps young kids especially look forward to the day in a unique way. The chocolate milk thing is not unique to us, by the way. I learned that from a friend of mine. But yeah, you find ways to increase the expectation and the value of the day, work around the significant things.
I think that's a great tip of having something special you do. It's been a while, but when my kids were little, we had Sundays on Sunday. And sometimes they'd be like, hey, do we have chocolate for this, on when we're going to the grocery store, or sprinkles or whatever. And so they got really excited about Sundays on Sunday. We know we're going to have that in the afternoon.
Yeah. All right. Well, getting into 48:5, let the provisions for the support of the family on that day be so ordered that others be not improperly detained from the public worship of God, nor hindered from sanctifying the Sabbath. So I wonder if this is one of our more archaic principles that they've got in place here. It seems like this is referring to people that might have had household help or servants around, maybe back in the day, right? You need to make sure that your servants are not being forced to work, domestic workers and stuff. That wouldn't apply to us as much today, of course. But what's in here that we should pull out?
I remember a story that was told to me by an elder that used to be at Scott's church. That his dad was like not a Sabbatarian at all. And his dad would go out to eat at restaurants, but then he was in right after church every week, And there was a sermon on evangelizing that he heard. And so he decided he was going to put that into practice when he got to the restaurant. And so, tried to start conversation with them. And the waitress and said, so do you go to church? And she's like, well, no. It's like, well, why? And he said, well, because I have to be here serving you. And that was his time where he's like, oh, that's why the principle is there. But so many times we make others work so that we don't have to. I know there's this church that used to have a Sunday meal in the 70s, and they had people that they hired to come in to prepare it. It's like, that is just, your church is getting to rest in some ways, but now you're making other people come in, miss their services in order to do this. That's wrong. To try to make as minimal as possible of people that have to work. Every week we pray for those that do acts of necessity and mercy, and we pray for firefighters and police and emergency personnel and those that keep the lights on and the water running. And we recognize the fact they have to do this in order for us to worship, but we pray that they would have an opportunity to worship. And we don't want to add to that every, grocery store, football referee, all these different things. To that. It should be a minimal list that we are praying that aren't able to worship because of needing their services.
This doesn't exactly have to do with 48.5, but I think it's helpful when thinking of the family itself, is that as the session sets times for worship, where they set their times and when they set their times can affect attendance to worship. Mm-hmm. And so if you have church, you don't have a morning service, say you have like a 1 p.m. service instead of a morning or evening service, you just meet at that time. That would hinder a lot of your families with kids from worshiping. If you have events during normal nap times, your attendance is gonna go down. There was a season at Providence when, during the pandemic, we were using a Lutheran church, and we had to meet at 2 p.m. and attendance was at 70 people. And the Sunday we switched to morning service at our school, it rocketed to 100. And it sustained itself at that, and we've grown a little since then. But it kind of shows you that, like, how you schedule your worship and even the times you schedule your worship can impact the availability of people to worship.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to the broad principle here. That is, it can be really easy to think about your Lord's Day observance and only think about yourself or your immediate family. But this is encouraging us to think about what are my practices on the Lord's Day, especially demanding of other people and requiring of other people. So a session setting a service at a certain time is a thoughtfulness about other people, right? They have to consider that. And so it can be so easy, I think, for us to consider the Lord's Day with only our own issues at play, but we have to think about other people. I think Jared's example is classic, right? It's even evangelistic to a point. I mean, that was sort of a negative evangelism kind of thing that was going on there, right? Like didn't really work the way it was trying to make it work. But there's a testimony that we bear, not just to the people who aren't in worship, but to the people who are, and to the people who want to be. And anyway, there's a lot more to think about than just me when it comes to what I'm doing on Sundays.
And it could be also good to think about your family in general. I mean, the commandment says your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant. Mm-hmm. I think thinking about what's your expectations for meals that day. Maybe it's more frozen pizza and sandwiches and things that are easy. Your wife should not have an ordinary day of having to do a lot of prep on that day either. And you may want to do fellowship. You may want to have people over, but to keep it simple with something like that, rather than we're going to do this really fancy meal. And so from the time church is out, I'm prepping that meal until dinner. That's probably not the best use of your time. So husbands need to think about this too and encourage their wives. This is not an expectation that we have this great, Sunday evening meal, or maybe let me make macaroni and cheese for the kids. And why don't you just, rest from getting the kids to church in the morning, and think about how you help others keep it to serve them.
Good. Well, here, let's keep going. 48:6, a little bit more, at this preparation we've been talking about. So let every person and family in the morning by secret and private prayer for themselves and others, especially for the assistance of God to their minister and for a blessing upon his ministry by reading the Scriptures and by holy meditation, prepare for communion with God and his public ordinances. So it's stated explicitly in the morning. So before worship, you need to be praying individually and as a family for some things that are about to be going on, especially preaching and the ministry of your pastor, and the reading of the Scriptures. Well, I guess sorry, I'm reading it wrong. But you're doing this by the reading of Scriptures and holy meditation, and you're preparing yourself for those holy ordinances. Right? What happens in worship requires preparation. You don't just show up and receive. Everybody is a part of preparing for public worship by praying ahead of time.
Yeah, I think of 6 and 7 as before worship and mostly after worship. So the Lord's Day is not just about you go to church on Sundays. There's preparation beforehand, and again, depending on how many little kids you have, there might not be a whole lot of time that is spent in long periods of reading Scriptures, but praying in the morning before you go to church, or even on the way, of like, Lord, quiet our hearts as we're about to enter into worship, and Lord, forgive me for just yelling at my kid right there and ruining their worship or ruining their preparation. There's a place for prayer before the worship service, and it's great when I have people tell me that they prayed for me for the worship that morning and for everybody else. Our session tries to do this in practice in between Sunday school and worship. We gather and pray for the worship service so that at least we've prayed for the worship before it happens.
Yeah, we include these kind of elements. Just speaking as somebody with young kids in the house, I hope that's a helpful angle. It can be hard to find quiet times before the worship service on Sundays, unless it's very early, which, we wake up early before our kids so we can have time to do things we need to do. But how do you teach your kids to do this? We'll say you can do it at a meal. If you're doing family devotions before public worship, that's a good time to do it. We always have a habit of praying in the car on the way to church. Just, either me or my wife or even one of the older girls will ask them to pray for a handful of things as we go, quieting our hearts and being with the preacher and helping the elders who are assisting and all those different things. There's ways to weave this into your habits, even if life feels crazy and like these things might be difficult to insert at points. I remember a story, Dr. David Irving, the now president of RTS in Jackson, he talks about one of his previous calls feeling sort of weighty and angsty regarding his preaching at certain seasons, and requesting his people to pray. And he says he can remember the particular day that he started being relieved from those feelings, and come to find out it's because so many of his congregation had started praying for him on a regular basis in relation to his Sunday morning duties. And he said, he felt more freedom in the pulpit and more affection for the work. So don't knock it till you tried it. Pray for your pastor, especially leading up to Sundays. All right. All the silence tells me to move on to 48:7. Let the time not used for public worship be spent in prayer, in devotional reading, and especially in the study of the Scriptures, meditation, catechizing, religious conversation, the singing of psalms, hymns, or spiritual songs, visiting the sick, relieving the poor, teaching the ignorant, holy resting, and in performing such like duties of piety, charity, and mercy. So the book is assuming that you will not be in a worship service all day long, but that there will be other time in your day on Sundays, and they give you a list of things to do that you can use to fill your time. I mean, what do you guys want to say about all these?
We've got pious advice. That's what this is.
For real.
This is. I don't think this is saying like this is a checklist that every single one of these things are done every single Sunday. But I think it's, again, helping flavor the day. Here are the types of things, the sorts of things that are worthy of your time on the Lord's Day that is in public worship. It's not a checklist of things, but It's a list of things that are available to us that would be edifying both to our souls and to our service to Christ.
Yeah, my wife and I often will have new people, visitors, people who've been there a few times over for lunch. And so that'll lead into the afternoon and it kind of goes along with a religious conversation. And then we also will have times in which some of the young families in the church will get together and have we call it a fellowship play date. The kids will play while the parents are actually able to have adult conversations, and fulfills some of these things. And it is a good reminder there of other things we can be doing. And I think for me, this has been a good reminder going through this section, having had smaller kids and now they're getting to a time in which there's a lot more interaction you can have. Thinking, how do we spend our Lord's Day? Is there a time that we can be opening up our hymnal? I play guitar. My wife plays a little piano. My son does too. Can we be learning hymns and saying, hey, what other hymns do we know in the hymn book? What do we want to learn here? I actually bought some journals of individual books of the Bible, and just to take my kids through that. Let's read it together and just talk about it. And those are things that you think about, like, oh, that'd be good to do sometime. I never have the time. Well, not, if we have a day for it, we have time to do it at least one day out of the week.
If your church has members that are unable to attend worship, they might be in a nursing home or something like that. Nursing home visits are good on the Lord's Day if you have the time. Sometimes that might be a fact. In our church, there's not a lot of time between our services on the Lord's Day to go do all of this. But if you have a lot of free time, you could go visit people in a nursing home. Think about people that might be sick. You could take them a meal. Again, to the point Jared was making, like this is a day you can do a lot of the stuff that maybe you had intention to do earlier in the week or in other days, and now you have a day to do it. If you don't have work to go do that day, you might have time to prepare a plate of cookies or brownies for a family who's having a hard time and drop it off and visit with them. Great section, very helpful. You won't run out of things to do. And I think that's maybe one place I would encourage people as we kind of draw this up to an end. If you are using the Lord's Day for the things it was designed for, you are likely not to find idle time. You're gonna have enough to do. So let that not be a concern of yours. There's still time for rest. Take a nap on Sundays. That's a hard thing to find most days. You need some physical rest. Take a walk, stretch your legs, but there's a lot of good things to do. And I think if we were to put a lot of this into practice, we would be blessed. And we certainly wouldn't run out of things to occupy the time on that day.
Yeah, I'd say maybe just a couple of things of, I think this chapter can help us in what the directory is for. This is a lot of good guidance and direction. If you're thinking, what guidance do I have on this? If you're just reading this of like, what does this tell me I have to do? You've missed the point of the Sabbath already. I just think of Isaiah 58. I just love that line, call the Sabbath a delight. Mm-hmm. That the Sabbath is supposed to be good. Like, you're supposed to look forward to Sunday, not be like, Sunday, I can't do the stuff I really want to do. No, we need to think about the Lord's Day as the day that we're able to do the things that we really do want to do. Do we want to hear scripture? Do we want to worship? Do we want to talk about these things and sing psalms and sing hymns? We should figure out ways to make the Lord's Day the day that we look forward to all week.
I almost don't even want to make light of our ending. Like, I always try to find something clever to say. It's not always very clever, but these are such serious topics. There's a ruling elder out there that listens to the show that I think about often on the Lord's Day. So as B.L. Peters would say, this podcast is over. Thank you for joining us and sharing time with us. If you are interested in learning more about what we've talked about, you can check out the show notes. We'll have at least one or two links down there today. You can support the show by clicking the link below. We talked about that earlier at the top of how that helps us out and what you might benefit in supporting the show. If you have questions or comments, you can contact us on social media at Polity Matters. You can also email us at politymattersfeedback@gmail.com. We are glad to be going through this material. Personally, it feels nice to be back in a regular groove. I feel like we've gotten sort of to the OG Polity Matters again, back to the way things were early on, and we hope you all enjoy it. If you have suggestions on folks we could talk to about any of these topics on the side, do let us know. We'd be happy to entertain those thoughts and suggestions. I think that's all I have to say, guys. So until next time, say goodbye, gentlemen.
Goodbye.
Y'all take care.